All right, I assume everybody's got questions this week about this rough draft. It was a topic of discussion last night in the VLS. So the assignment. So make sure that you have a title and your name, date, and then cite your sources. So have your two sources for this week. And again, they give you one source, that NIOSH website. So half the work is done for you. Just when you cite that source, copy that whole link up at the top of the taskbar. The idea is that I should be able to cut and paste that into my search bar and go right to the page you're looking at. So this is not the rubric I was looking for. Let's see. Here we go. So the description of the incident, obviously, what went wrong. So here's the part I think people are asked: the biography and history of the deceased firefighter, along with the description of the fire department. If the information isn't there, it's hard for you to include, but that it's a volunteer fire department, what town. Generally, you can find out, number of employees and maybe calls per year, that kind of thing, generally. So give what you got.
They had 25 volunteers. I couldn't figure out what their call volume was, but I was able to find the obituary for the firefighter.
Give me what you got, and if it's really, really lean, explain, that I could not find this kind of information. But I think if we know what kind of fire department, that it's a volunteer, paid on call, whatever, what town, about how many firefighters, I think we're doing pretty good there. Okay. Is it rural, urban, that kind of thing? That's also part of the biography of the fire department. So include what you can find. Okay. Yep. Same thing with the firefighter themselves. I don't need to know what their, second grade report card was, but generally you can find in the bio, in the obituary and stuff, they were a 15-year member, rank of captain, that kind of thing. Okay.
I was going to say, I found out my guy's actually pretty interesting from the obituary.
Yeah. So the more information you have, the better, but remember, 800 to 1,000 words is not very long. That's really a two-page paper. So, don't get too bogged down in the details of the biography and stuff, brief. I'm more interested in what happened. And then the NIOSH considerations for what could have avoided it. In other words, what were they dinged on? What lessons can we learn from it? That's the whole idea of this, is that you guys have learned the lessons of these fire department. Every tragedy is a lesson, right? And so,
right.
I'm more interested in that, than again, know what year this guy got married, right? So, the building construction, fire conditions, and fire behavior, that stuff is important if you can find it. That gives us a better, and that is usually all in the NIOSH report. That's part of the thing that they investigate. It gives us a better idea, paints that picture for us of what was going on and how did it get so bad that somebody passed away, right? There was some discussion last night, about what kind of incidents are appropriate. For me, for our company, for Cherry Valley Charlie, if it's important to you and you're interested in it, then learn from it. I'm not going to dictate that it has to be structural firefighting or anything like that. If it was somebody had a heart attack after responding to an incident and that's important to you for some reason or interesting to you, then those are lessons we need to learn for the fire service as well. Like I said, I had a couple in the last couple deliveries who did diving incidents, because they were close to a river in their town and it was important to them. So I'm fine with that. As long as the research is good and those NIOSH reports are very well researched. So the information is there for you. So then you really just need one more source. I believe it's right. Two sources. Two sources. So if you can find a news story article about it, the obituary, a YouTube link to the local news that night about it, anything else that relates to it as a second source. So, and do your best, you know, if you can do APA or MLA citations, great. If you can't and you don't know how, I'm not going to fail you for that. You know, again, especially most of the stuff now is searched online. Just include that entire web page in so that I can just cut and paste it and it'll take me right to wherever you were. Okay. Again, some discussion last night. A lot of people had about, you know, what are we looking for in the rough draft? My understanding and the way I grade it is I'm just looking for evidence of obvious effort on your part. You know, that you've done the research, you have the sources, you know what information you're going to include. Me personally, I don't need the whole paper typed out right now. If you include a very detailed and well thought out outline about how you're going to write the paper, for me, that works. That's a good rough draft for me, okay? The more you get it done, number one, you don't have it hanging over your head for the next 9 weeks, and the more feedback I can give you on what you submitted. So we have more time to get it done. I had, you know, the last time I had 2 or 3 students where I wrote them back, I said, fix one thing here, change the name from, you know, rough draft to, you know, the title of the paper final, and just turn it in and I'll grade it because it's good. So I have no problem. If it's good, I'll tell you that, and you can go ahead and submit it and I'll grade it right away and get it done. So, but if you don't have that, if you don't like writing or you're not good at it, you want to take your time. And like I said, you just want to do a nice detailed outline with the evidence of your research showing through that, then I'm good with that. So it's just the rough draft, okay? And the one thing I got to say too, and I said this last time, just because, you know, last time was a little bit different because we were doing, you know, quantifiable grading 1 through 4, you know, if you get you know, if you pass on the rough draft, but then do nothing to it and it's just an outline, then it's obviously not a research paper that will get a passing grade 9 weeks from now. So, but these are pass fail. So nobody should be too stressed out about their writing skills, okay? Does anybody have any questions about the paper or their topic that they chose that they want to ask about or anything like that?
Sources that we're citing.
Hold on one second, Dave. Sorry. Got the window open and my neighbor start blowing leaves. Go ahead.
So the sources that we're citing, can we use the references that they have on the report?
Other than the NIOSH report, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, if you're pulling information off of it, any source you're pulling information off is your source. Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Okay.
So, okay. Any other questions?
No, not a question, but one thing that might help others like it did me. If you're having trouble finding the name and stuff, IFSI does have a line of duty death search section in there.
Wow, okay.
Because that's where I had to find like 50% of the information. The NIOSH report didn't have the name or anything.
On the fire department or the person?
On the person's name along with the fire department.
Oh,
It didn't name the exact fire department in the NIOSH report.
oh, okay. All right.
So, yeah, I ended up getting that off of IFSI's site.
All right, good news to have, good information to have. Okay. Is anybody pretty much done with it, with the rough draft? I know I graded one of them so far.
Not yet.
Okay. Okay. Everybody done their VLS for this week? Okay. Any questions about the material we covered? Fire suppression? Pretty straightforward, right? I know that PowerPoint jumped around a lot, but last year when they gave it to me, there were legitimately 270 slides. So like we had to cut that thing down a little bit. So I will, let's see, get out of this. Oh man. Hold on one sec, guys. All right. So this is what I was trying to get to and somehow clicked out of it. So this is the assignment for this week. Again, fire suppression, just one chapter, and actually not really a very long one when you look at it. Which is kind of funny because fire suppression is like what we're here for. And it's, you'd think it'd be the longest one, but the 4 methods of fire extinguishment, just remember that's that fire tetrahedron. We're just removing a leg from that tetrahedron: heat, fuel, oxygen, or chain reaction. That's how we do it. Everything we do is one of those. In the VLS, we discussed direct attack, which is water right on the seat of the fire; indirect attack, which is water, when you can't get into the room, so maybe a defensive operation. You're banking water off the ceiling and causing it to break apart, and the stream to break apart and rain down on the fire and cool it down. That can be used in either a defensive operation or in this transitional attack, which I'll talk about in just a second. Combination attack, that's more of like an interior offensive firefighting method of applying water. That's where when you get into the fire room, you sweep the ceiling real quick first, just kind of cool some of those hot gases that are baking you, and then drop down onto the seat of the fire and put the fire out. All of these things should be done in kind of like short, quick bursts. You don't need a whole lot of water to darken it down generally, to stop the free burning or the growth phase. Okay, usually you can arrest that very quickly with not a whole lot of water. And what you're trying to do is to stop the fire from growing and spreading and getting worse without causing a tremendous amount of steam expansion and turning yourself into a lobster. Okay, so especially these indirect attacks, combination attacks where you're hitting the ceiling, you're up in that highest level of those that thermal layering. If you do a whole lot of steam conversion up top, you're going to cool it and you're going to drop that thermal layer down on top of you and really, really kind of steam yourself. So you have to be judicious in the way you apply water to the ceiling. By the way, that method is what the gas cooling is. So when I talk about, cooling that gas layer up at the top, that's what they mean, and we're doing that with the indirect or combination attack. Okay. And then the transitional attack. So I talked about this last night in our VLS. I don't know if they talked about it on Monday. So when you make that decision, that strategic decision, when you get on scene, are you going to go offensive on a structure fire? I'm talking offensive, which means interior. You're going to drag a line inside, find a seat of the fire and put water on it. That's an offensive fire attack. Defensive fire attack, as it's too far gone, I can't get in there safely. Anything that's in there is dead anyway. And we're going to stay out here outside in the yard. We're going to put water on this thing from outside. And really our primary goal in that situation is to just stop it from spreading to exposures. So if you were in a totally defensive, fully involved fire and you pull up, you might see yourself applying water to the unburning house next to it first, because that's where it's going to go. This house is already a loss. You might not get water on that burning house until the second line, maybe. Okay, that's a defensive attack. So a transitional attack is much more involved lately in the last 10, 15 years as we've started to understand fire science better. And that's where I got a lot of fire, and it's kind of, right on that border between I could go offensive, I could go defensive. I'm going to get my butt kicked. I might not make this, but I don't feel like I should, write it off yet either. So transitional attack is when I got a lot of fire showing, and it's self-vented already. It's blowing out of a window. Okay, I know I'm going to go offensive. My overreaching goal is to get inside, put water on the seat of the fire, and save this building and whoever might still be inside of it. But what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to buy a little bit of time. I got fire showing. I'm looking at it. I can put water in through that window or that door that it's venting out of in an indirect attack, banking it off the ceiling, short, easy burst, darken it down. And basically I'm resetting that clock. When we looked at that time temperature curve and that super fast acceleration of temperature when firefighters open the door, right? you bring that temperature down just by doing that, just by cooling that gas layer, raining a little bit of water on the seat of the fire. And then, so I begin defensive with that exterior attack. Then I transition very rapidly into an offensive fire attack. This can be done a couple of ways. You could have two lines going. You could have one guy hitting it real quick while you're stretching the line of the front door. My engineer, my driver that I work with, he kind of has a standing order. We have a very easy deck gun to get to and use. He has a standing order that if we can see fire from the front when we pull up, go ahead and hit it with the deck gun for a 5-10 second blast while we're pulling the line. Help reset that clock for me and make it a little bit easier, more tenable for us to get in there. Or you can do it with the line that you pull, right? So you pull up, you stretch a line to the front door, you're seeing fire rolling out the living room window next to you. Go ahead and hit it while they're sizing that door up. Knock it down, don't open up a wide fog in there. Don't open the nozzle for a long time and cause a tremendous amount of steam expansion, because then you're going to make things worse. But if you just, like I said, real judiciously, just kind of hit that thing, you're going to cool it down. You're going to make things a whole lot better for you and anybody who's in there. And it's just going to make it easier for you to get in there and put that fire out. So that's what a transitional attack is. They didn't really talk about it in the VLS. I did, but it is mentioned in the book, and it's important to know because it's a very, very common firefighting tactic now. Like I said, if you can see fire, there's, in the old days, they used to tell us you're going to push fire through the building, you're going to kill anybody who's in there. And the reality is, maybe if you had a fog nozzle going full blast, but with a straight stream or solid stream used, cautiously in an indirect method, that's really not going to happen. Okay. Generally. Okay. Basement fires, we continue to talk about basement fires, and the reason why is because they're so effing dangerous. They're very difficult fires to get. I myself, got lost in a basement fire and just by the grace of God found the stairs and got back out, but they're very, very hard to make, especially if there's not secondary entrance or egress to the basement. And many residential structures that have basements don't have secondary egress. Nowadays, they're supposed to have escape window in them, but that's not really a route you're going to take to bring a line into a basement, right? Walkout basements, yes. And everybody knows what I mean by a walkout basement, when it's a 2-story on the front of the building and you go around the back and you can see the basement. Now it's 3 stories from the back, usually a sliding glass patio door. A lot of times related living situations down there, mother-in-law suite in the walkout basement, that kind of thing. If that's the case, if you have a walkout basement and it's a basement fire, then it's worth your time to as much as possible to take the extra time, stretch the line to the rear of the building and make entry from there. That's why when we talked about size up, I mentioned the 360, which is basically a walk around the building. It's very, very important you get a 360 done. Because what you see at the front may not be what you see at the back. And many people have, called for the full still and they're dropping lines and everything else for what looks like a raging fire on the back of the building. They go around the back and it's a grill on fire 20 feet away from the house, so do your 360s. It's really important. But anyway, going back to basement fires. So things that you got to worry about, obviously, is the first floor failing because you have fire underneath it. So if you go in on the first floor, you have fire below you. If you're in the basement, it's working against the fire above you, right? Against the floor above you, especially if it's unfinished. If it's unfinished, those structural members are exposed and being attacked by fire. And usually they're weighted, there's furniture upstairs and things like that. Finished basements offer a little bit more protection because there's usually a ceiling material. Drywalled ceilings obviously offer the most protection. Hung ceilings, the grid pattern hung ceiling with the tiles, not nearly as much protection. They can actually burn. And then you have the added danger that if that ceiling fails and the grid falls on top of you, that is an entanglement hazard that is going to be very difficult for you to overcome. So, and then the other thing too, finished basements, right? They're generally not standardized. They're chopped up into whatever the homeowner needed at the time they decide to finish it. So you may have bedrooms, you may have offices, One side may be finished, one side unfinished, they're just not very standard. The layouts are confusing. And obviously then, you're making entry down the stairs, which in an enclosed basement is the only flow path available to that basement fire. Cool air coming down along the bottom of the stairs and hot air going down out of the top of the stairwell. And that's what you're trying to crawl down. So very, very difficult fire to fight. And you just have to be honest with yourself, can we make this or not? And if you can't make it, you just have to be willing to voice that on the radio and back out. Don't get anybody killed for a basement. And to be honest, if it's that hot, you can't get down there, anybody who's in that basement has not survived. Probably not going to flash as long as it's not vented, because it's going to be oxygen limited. However, and I've said this before, like when you're doing these LODD reports, what happens oftentimes in basement fires, unfortunately, is that there's some kind of unplanned or uncoordinated ventilation event. Maybe it's a lookout window or something. The window, somebody breaks it open and now it's vented. You have an inlet through the window and you have an outlet through the stairwell. And if you have guys on the stairwell, you just made things drastically worse for them. And it doesn't even have to be intentional. One of the LODD reports I read like last year, I think, these guys were on the stairwell making their way down. They were coordinating their vent, but the window itself failed from the heat. And then it suddenly vented and they got cooked, and I think 3 people killed on the top of the stairs. So a lot of concerns with basement fires. It was an entire topic of discussion in the DLS. It's also in your chapter. I'm just listing off a few of those concerns, okay? Ventilation, excessive heat, limited access, entrance and egress, the floor above you failing, that kind of thing, okay? Duties of firefighters related to building utilities, pretty simple. There's the part in the chapter about controlling utilities. It's usually done. I talked last night about engine work versus truck work. Don't get too hung up on that. You don't have a truck, your engine's gonna have to do truck work. But one of the things that you want to get a crew to do early on, after you get your attack line moving in and stuff, and you got a search going, is let's get somebody on utilities and make sure the gas is shut off. To be honest with you, from outside the building, there's generally not much more you can do than shut off the gas or the propane. Water, you're gonna really need the water department to open up the Buffalo box to shut it off from the street. And generally, for the most part, electricity, you're gonna have to shut off at the main panel, which is usually in the house. So you have to throw the main breaker. Back in the day, they used to pull meters. I ran in an apartment last delivery that said they still do that. We don't do that anymore because you definitely absolutely can get electrocuted from pulling a meter. So really electricity is going to have to be from an interior crew. The exterior crew, that's one of those things like if you have a RIT company assigned, RIT being the rapid intervention team, if you have a RIT company assigned, that's one of the things that they can do. If you're taking your RIT responsibilities seriously, you get assigned, hey, you're RIT. You should have your tools assembled at the front of the building. And you should actually take your own 360, walk around and get a look for the layout, find out where all the egresses are, where look at the accountability board, see where you think these companies are working. So you have an idea. So when they say, hey, we got a issue on the second floor, well, where the windows are on the second floor, who's operating on the second floor, and how you might hopefully have made a plan. Another thing that and so while you're doing that 360, you can very easily shut off the gas. Another thing that RIT companies can do very easily is throw ladders to windows if they haven't already been thrown. Anytime you have a crew working on the second floor, you should have a ladder to that window. So the process of attacking a vehicle fire. Remember, we talked about approaching from the corners because you have those gas struts on some of the bumpers. Again, not so much on cars. Cars usually have the collapsible honeycomb bumpers, but the trucks might have the struts, the gas struts. But cars do also have gas struts on the hatches for the hood and the hatchback. And those are basically sealed containers. And you add heat to a sealed container, eventually it's going to rupture. So approach from the corners because you don't want to get hit by flying bumper. Use your hose to sweep underneath the car as well to any hazardous materials or liquids that are dripping off. You want them to blow it away from you. And then you're gonna, use your line to try to extinguish the fire as you approach. Oftentimes getting up underneath the wheel well works very well. And you want as much as possible to darken that down and extinguish it before you open up the hood. Because like I said, if you open up the hood and you haven't done a good job of extinguishing, it can be kind of like pulling the lid off the grease pan too early. You think it's out, you pull it off, and then it flashes. So, and then for opening that hood, when I learned this, we used K12s exclusively, the circular saws or rotary saws, because they had the power. They also don't run very well in smoke though, because they're naturally aspirated. And so you'd always had a hard time keeping them revved up enough if the engine was smoking really bad. But now with e-hydraulics, they're so quick and easy to deploy. A Halligan bar and a e-hydraulic spreader will make mincemeat out of a hood. So, and then there's other things you can do too. I'm sure you're going to learn how to do it. You could stick the ads of your Halligan bar just under the edge and then crimp it back, and it will just tent it a little bit and get a nozzle in there. Little easy tricks for that. Some people will smash out the headlight and put the nozzle in that way, that kind of thing. Alternative fuel stuff, natural gas, compressed natural gas and liquid natural gas, propane. Remember, these are pressurized containers. So clearly that's a threat, a different concern for us, and each of them has a possibility to be damaged or the valves to be damaged and for them to gas off, off gas. If it's ruptured, probably the best way to find it would be metering. Propane and natural gas, you're going to smell too, but you want to be able to get a meter on it and make sure that you're not operating in the flammable range if you have a leak. So one thing that you can do if you have a leak, if you have a plume or something like that, is a fog pattern on the plume itself will actually kind of knock that plume down. So electric and hybrid, obviously here our big concern is the batteries and the cables running power to the drivetrain from the batteries. We don't want to cut into those. So, like I said, like spiders and snakes, if it's brightly colored, don't touch it, right? Okay, so yellow, orange, and blue, right? They say not to cut that. I wish that Matt Goodner was here because he's really good at this stuff. I believe they're all required to have some kind of disconnect or cut loop so that you can DC power to the drivetrain. Thing about these two is it's not generally obvious if they're on or not. They don't have keys, they have those proximity fobs. They're dead silent, so it can be on and activated. People aren't very good about putting their cars in park after they're in an accident, So when you size up an accident after, one of the things you need to get into that door and make sure that it's in park and off, or set the parking brake. So, and if those batteries catch fire, they burn forever. There's all kinds of videos of those Teslas. And like I said, my understanding is that you can just use water. You just don't have enough water, they burn for hours. So ethanol and methanol, like I said, we live in the Midwest, we have ethanol mix in our gasoline anyway. And during a gas crunch like we have now, you see push for more ethanol. The difference is those are alcohol based, they're not hydrocarbon based, right? So alcohol based are much more soluble in water. Any foam blanket you put down, it's going to attack your foam blanket because our foam blankets are water-based foam blankets. So as you're laying foam down, the ethanol is going to work very quickly to eat at that foam blanket, and you really want a clear, solid foam blanket to completely smother those vapors from air around it. So that's kind of the concern with the ethanol methanol, is that it's a polar solvent. Most people now are carrying alcohol resistant foam though, and that's good. You just got to make sure you're running it at the right percentage. So for instance, theoretically, we should be able to use 3% foam concentration on gasoline, but where I work, we run it at 6% because there's so much ethanol, we just assume it acts like a polar solvent. So Biodiesel, diesel fuels don't burn very readily. They do burn, but one thing about biodiesel though is that, again, a lot of these times, that's one of the few things that might be a home fix. You might not be aware it's biodiesel. People are converting their trucks to biodiesel, or the discarded bacon grease stuff too, even. Especially the grease guys, the ones that go around collecting grease from restaurants and running their cars off of it, in this area, they have to add heating elements to the lines to keep that stuff liquid. So you have, all kinds of electrical things jury-rigged into this that you're not aware of. So hydrogen, you're just not going to see anywhere, but hydrogen is flammable. So just be aware of it. Protect the exposure, I think. That's about all you can do. The ground cover fires, remember that was ground was basically, so ground, surface, and crown, okay? So ground fires would be like humus and peat that is actually the ground itself, stuff you walk on. Those burn forever. They kind of like smoldering fires. They're damp, but they're basically almost tar, almost oil at this point. They will burn forever. Like I said, when I started in Orland in 1987, they had just had a peat bog fire, because most of that town was built on peat bog. And they predict that that thing is probably still smoldering somewhere underground, 25 years later. So that's ground, is where it's actual ground, humus or peat. Surface is all the brush and detritus that's on top of the ground. So the low stuff, the grass, the bushes, the fallen limbs, things like that. And then crown fires are up in the trees, the tops of the trees. So when the tops of the trees get burning, that's when it really gets going. So ground, surface, and crown. Yeah, this is that picture that looks like a foot. The origin, obviously, where it starts. The head is the furthest part, right? The furthest, widest part as it's gotten. The fingers are the little individual creepers out from the fire. The perimeter is the whole thing. The heel, so the origin, it burns out towards the head. It's going to follow prevailing wind directions this way, burn out to the heel is where it kind of burns back slowly from the origin. So it will burn back against the wind, just not nearly as quickly. The flanks, obviously, the sides and back. Spot fires are fires ahead of the main body of the fire. So maybe picked up an ember, got in the air, and caught something ahead of it. No, it's spot fire. The green is unburned, the black is burned. So direct and indirect, we talked about direct and indirect with structure fires. Direct attack on wildland fires is when you're basically walking the fire line with your Indian pack or your forest line, if you got your brush buggy with you, and you're just putting flames out. You're actually putting flames out along the fire line. It's always done from the black, from the burned area. Because that's the safest place for you. Just make sure you have boots on, because it does get hot. And an indirect attack in this case is when you're cutting a fire line ahead of it. You're making your line in the sand. You will not go past here. You cut your fire line. That's the indirect attack. The parallel attack is an indirect attack that kind of mimics the perimeter of the fire. So you're going to create a noose around it with your fire line. The image that they showed there was basically like a cornfield fire, and a farmer's out there with his discer, and he just cuts a big swath of corn out of the way so it won't get past there. The fire lines are the lines that you're cutting for your indirect attack. And then everybody knows what topography is. It's just the up and down vertical elements of the ground. So pretty straightforward. It is actually a lot of information. You could probably do just one whole chapter on just structural firefighting and then one whole chapter on everything else. But that's basically the homework. That's the VLS in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions about last week's stuff either? No, cool. Okay, nothing else? You guys are the most silent bunch. I talked to these other AIMs and they're like, man, we talked for an hour and a half. They're more interesting, I guess. So, all right. Anybody have any questions at all? If you need help, you're struggling on that paper, reach out to me. We got a couple more days yet. So, because I think it's due Sunday, right? It's not due Thursday night. Yeah, in the past, they were doing Thursday night, the papers. So, but I think we changed that. So, if you need help, let me know. Call me, email me. But if you make an honest effort, like a real honest effort, and you really do your work and you do your research, you're going to pass. So don't worry about it. Okay. All right. Peace out.
See ya.
Thank you.
Yeah.